face to face. A powerful denial that no collusion existed in the 2016 election. We have the latest from President Trump's one-on-one meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin. Behind the scenes, what the Vatican is doing to stop bloodshed in Nicaragua. Pro-life turning point? How Supreme Court nominee Judge Brett Kavanaugh could impact the pro-life cause. We talked to a White House official. And a fete for France. Soccer fans in Paris celebrate their team's victory in the World Cup title game. On EWTN News Nightly for Monday, July 16th, 2018. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you to those of you joining us from around the world for news from a Catholic perspective. I'm Lauren Ashburn. President Trump openly questions U.S. intelligence in a press conference with Russian leader Vladimir Putin today in Helsinki. It comes as U.S. federal authorities arrest a Russian woman accused of conspiring to infiltrate American political organizations at the direction of a senior Kremlin official. White House correspondent Mark Irons reports. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, Lauren. We knew election meddling would be the hot topic going into today's summit. President Putin says he did want Donald Trump to win the U.S. election, but took no action to make it happen. Again, President Trump says there was no campaign collusion with Russia, and today he said he doesn't see any reason why Russia would interfere in the 2016 election.
During today's meeting, I addressed directly with President Putin the issue of Russian interference in our elections. I felt this was a message best delivered in person.
President Trump and Russian President Putin spent a great deal of time discussing Russian meddling as they met Monday for several hours. But the president did not strongly condemn the interference efforts. He did continue to deny any involvement between his campaign and Russia.
There was no collusion. I didn't know the president. There was nobody to collude with. There was no collusion with the campaign.
Could you name a single fact that would definitively prove the collusion?
The Russian president says there are no facts to back up collusion claims, but he does admit he wanted candidate Trump to win, thinking he would be better for U.S.-Russia relations. And despite U.S. intelligence that has proven Russia did meddle in the presidential election, President Trump is listening to Putin as well.
So I have great confidence in my intelligence people, but I will tell you that President Putin was extremely strong and powerful in his denial today.
Hours before his meeting with Putin, President Trump tweeted, "Our relationship with Russia has never been worse thanks to many years of U.S. foolishness and stupidity, and now the rigged witch hunt."
However, that changed as of about 4 hours ago.
President Trump describing the highly anticipated summit as a first step to a brighter future. Outside the meeting, protesters gathered in Helsinki, including abortion advocates who oppose the Mexico City policy, which prevents U.S. taxpayer money from promoting overseas abortions.
We want to gain some visibility for the draconian policy that Trump has put in place, which cuts all funding to health organizations that provide services, critical services to women and children in low-income countries.
Pro-life organizations strongly support the Mexico City policy, saying it protects unborn children abroad. President Trump reinstated the policy shortly after being elected. Lauren?
Mark, today, President cited Vladimir Putin's denials of the Russian meddling. How is the U.S. intelligence community reacting?
The director of national intelligence, Dan Coats, released a statement this afternoon saying, quote, "We have been clear in our assessments of Russian meddling in the 2016 election and their ongoing pervasive efforts to undermine our democracy." He adds, "We will continue to provide unvarnished and objective intelligence in support of our national security." Lauren?
White House correspondent Mark Irons, thank you. Key members of Congress, including some Republicans, are calling the president's press conference bizarre and shameful. Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi joins us with more reaction. Good evening, Jason.
Good evening, Lauren. Lawmakers on both sides of the aisle are furious the president would not confirm the findings of U.S. intelligence that Russia meddled in the 2016 presidential election. The president's explosive comments come after American prosecutors charged 12 Russian intelligence agents with hacking the Democratic National Committee and Hillary Clinton's campaign. Democrats are blasting the president as he shares the stage with Russian President Vladimir Putin.
His behavior is so inexplicable and so against the interests of the United States, so against what all of his advisors would tell him, that Americans are scratching their head and saying, if that's not the explanation, that Putin has something on it, what is it? What the heck could it be?
But the criticism is also coming from President Trump's own party.
I just felt like the president's comments made us look as a nation more like a pushover, and I was disappointed in that.
In a statement, Speaker Paul Ryan says the president must appreciate that Russia is not our ally. There is no moral equivalence between the United States and Russia, which remains hostile to our most basic values and ideals. The United States must be focused on holding Russia accountable and putting an end to its vile attacks on democracy. Democratic leaders opposed the Trump-Putin private meeting, but failed to stop it.
There should be no one-on-one meeting between this president and Mr. Putin. There needs to be other Americans in the room.
The top Democrat on the Senate Intelligence Committee worried that Putin would take advantage of the president.
I've been concerned for some time that the president's ad hoc style of going into meetings and winging it isn't appropriate, particularly when you're dealing with someone like Vladimir Putin, who's been on the world stage for 20 years, former KGB agent.
Former CIA Director John Brennan went so far as to claim President Trump's press conference rises to the level of high crimes and misdemeanors. And Senator John McCain called it one of the most disgraceful performances by an American president in memory. Lauren?
At the center of this controversy is Russian meddling in the U.S. election. So, what is the government doing to protect the upcoming midterm election?
The Homeland Security Secretary says the department will help state and local leaders prepare for cyber attacks. Kirsten Nielsen warns that Russia is using social media to create divisions among Americans.
Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi. Thank you, Jason. Joining me now is John Evans, the former U.S. Consul General in St. Petersburg, Russia, from 1994 to 1997. And while you were there, you worked with Vladimir Putin. You're a former U.S. ambassador to Armenia. Welcome back.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
Did President Trump, by casting doubt on the intelligence community's finding, slap them in the face?
I think it was very unusual what he has said, but I think there are a lot of nuances here. I mean, lots of intelligence agencies do lots of things all the time under the cover of secrecy. Lots of people hack. We hack. The Chinese hack. The Israelis hack. Everybody hacks. The question for me is what was...
I don't hack. I'm sorry. Okay, go ahead.
The question, though, is what was done with the results of that hacking, and was there any American involvement in that?
President Putin said that he wanted President Trump to win. And he said, yes, I would respond to Mueller's investigation. Mm-hmm. Is Putin taking the issue more seriously than Trump?
Oh, I'm not sure we can make a comparison there, but I think it was no secret that not only President Putin, but most Russians who are politically aware, at least, did not care very much for Hillary Clinton. And so they, whether rightly or not, they certainly expressed a preference for Mr. Trump.
Some of the criticism is that he is meeting with a man who has slaughtered or been involved in, behind the scenes, the slaughter of 500,000 Syrians, who has invaded the Ukraine. And they are saying that, you know, this is a problem, and Putin is saying this is we are a democratic state. Is he trying to avert eyes from those issues?
Well, there are a lot of issues here, some of which are not completely proven. I think it depends very much more on Russian state interests than it does just on Mr. Putin. Now, I knew Mr. Putin quite well in St. Petersburg. I even had to ask him for help one time because some American investors had trouble with the mob. And he was very...
The Russian mob.
Russian mob.
Mm-hmm.
And Putin was very straight with me and very helpful. And he was not anti-American. He was not anti-Western. He was a Christian. I used to run into him in church at Easter time.
We have actually some pictures of that, of him in the Russian Orthodox Church.
Well, and just recently he went up to Valam, which is a little shrine up in the north of Russia. He was there with some church people. So I think he truly is an Orthodox believer. He was not anti-Semitic. He was not a communist. He was not even homophobic, which is a frequent charge made. But this was Vladimir Putin in the 90s. Things can change, circumstances can change, but the main thing is Russian interests are now involved. We have our interests, they have their interests, and he's not our man. He's the president of Russia. So it's quite natural that we're not so happy with some things they're doing.
But my question really went to some of the draconian issues and alleged actions.
Well, take, for example, the murders that keep happening in Russia. They were happening before Putin became president.
But that doesn't mean anything. He's not stopping them.
Well, it's a big country, and there are a lot of people, just as ours is a big country. We don't blame Mr. Trump for every murder that takes place in the United States. There are definitely some bad actors out there who are taking out people they don't like, including journalists.
I have to just say before we go, I have to say before we go, do you remember when it was verboten to criticize the president when he was abroad? Doesn't that seem quaint now?
It used to be that politics ended at the water's edge, and I think that was a pretty good principle.
Thank you so much, John Evans, former U.S. Consul General to St. Petersburg, Russia.
Thank you.
A federal judge today orders a temporary halt to the deportations of reunited families separated by the Trump administration. The American Civil Liberties Union filed the lawsuit in San Diego, saying it is based on rumors mass deportations may be carried out immediately upon reunification. The judge is giving Justice Department lawyers 1 week to respond. Fallout in Syria after the government unleashes hundreds of missiles on a rebel-held area near the Golan Heights. It is the latest attempt to clear southern Syria of insurgents. The push came after forces secured most of the Dera province late last week. Syrian officials say the success in driving the opposition out embodies the will of Syria's army and its allies to fight terrorism. The Vatican says it is working behind the scenes to quell the bloodshed in Nicaragua. The news follows a weekend of violence between protesters seeking to oust leftist President Daniel Ortega. It left 10 people dead and more than 20 wounded after a shootout in a local church in the capital, Managua. Cardinal Leopoldo Brenes, Archbishop of Managua, negotiated the end to the deadly standoff at the Jesus of Divine Mercy Church. Vatican correspondent Juliet Lindley joins us from Rome. Juliet, almost 300 people are dead. Thousands are wounded. What is the Vatican doing to help solve this crisis, and how can they be successful with the controversy around Catholics in Nicaragua?
Lauren, a very good question. Well, the Holy See today said that it continues to use quiet and persistent diplomacy. Now, the church in Nicaragua is continuing to make every effort to help to bring an end to this standoff between anti-government protesters that are mainly students and the police. And in a statement over the weekend, the Archdiocese of Managua confirmed that it was its Archbishop, Cardinal Leopoldo Brenes, together with the Vatican's ambassador to Nicaragua, who mediated the release of some 200 students who are under fire in the Jesus of Divine Mercy Church for more than 12 hours. And the church leaders reportedly were the ones who helped to escort the students out of the church, Lauren.
Bishops are demanding certain conditions. What are they?
Yeah, they've stipulated 2 conditions for talks to go forward. President Daniel Ortega must resign and new national elections must be called. Well, so far, these 2 conditions have shown no sign of materializing, Lauren. Ortega, who's been in power since 2007, and his wife, who is the vice president, Rosario Murillo, said earlier this month that they would ignore calls for early elections. And let me point out, Lauren, that the next ballot is scheduled for 2021. So that's pretty far off still.
Catholic leaders, as I said earlier, are coming under attack. As you just said, he is not bowing to the Vatican's requests.
Indeed, and last week, Cardinal Brenes, the Vatican ambassador, and the auxiliary bishop of Managua were roughed up. They were roughed up by paramilitary forces, and the attack took place as they were trying to help anti-government protesters. Now, the bishop was punched in the stomach, Lauren, and his arm was injured. His pectoral cross was reportedly snatched from him, and a priest that was accompanying the bishop had his phone stolen. So these are without a doubt the bloodiest protests in the country since the Civil War ended in 1990, Lauren.
Juliet Lindley, EWTN News Nightly Vatican correspondent. Thank you.
Thank you, Lauren.
Migrants aboard 2 ships are allowed ashore in Sicily, but only after a half-dozen European nations agreed to each take some in. Italy's hardline anti-migrant government had prevented the ships from docking for 2 days. The migrants who are from Libya disembarked earlier today. Doctors say all but one were in generally good health. Coming up, a closer look at the rulings of Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh. Plus, the Holy Father's message for Christian missionaries. The behind-the-scenes lobbying efforts to confirm Supreme Court nominee Judge Brett Kavanaugh continue in full force. The conservative Judicial Crisis Network today says it's making another advertising buy, this time for $1.4 million in support of Kavanaugh. Joining me now is Kerry Peck. She's a spokesperson for the White House team working on the confirmation of Judge Brett Kavanaugh. Kerry, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me on.
Judge Kavanaugh said that one of his first judicial heroes was former Chief Justice William Rehnquist, a conservative, the person who provided one of the dissenting votes on Roe versus Wade. What do you say to Democrats who fear that Kavanaugh could provide the swing vote to overturn Roe versus Wade?
His record speaks for itself. Anybody can go back and take a look at those. Those are public documents. And he does list Rehnquist and Scalia as his heroes, and they were originalists. They were textualists. They looked back at the Constitution and looked at those words as having meaning, legal meaning, and they understood their roles as justices, which is to apply the law, interpret the law, but certainly not to make law.
What about overturning Roe versus Wade?
Well, the president didn't ask his position on that. And the president also made pretty clear in the rollout speech when he was introducing Judge Kavanaugh the other night that he was looking on that list he put out, which is one of the most transparent lists, I think, in United States history. He was looking for someone and looking for people who were committed to the words of the Constitution. This was a very transparent process. There was no litmus test. And Judge Kavanaugh's record does demonstrate a commitment to precedent, but also a respect to the government's permissible interest in protecting unborn life.
But we do have to say all nominees who are mentioned are pro-life. Social conservatives believe that he is not conservative enough on those issues. How do you assuage those people?
At the time when President Trump announced his intent to nominate Judge Gorsuch, they had similar concerns. And I think that most conservatives are quite pleased with how Justice Gorsuch has performed on the bench. Let's talk.
So?
Well, specifically, he's been part of the majority in 3 pivotal religious liberty
Trinity
cases.
Lutheran,
Masterpiece Cake Shop,
which ruled in favor of the baker who did not want to serve a same-sex couple.
And create a custom wedding cake to celebrate the religious ceremony of marriage. And NIFLA, which said that, no, the state of California cannot force pro-life pregnancy centers to advertise for abortion.
Should questions of faith be off limits in these hearings? We saw the confirmation hearings of Judge Amy Coney Barrett, where they said the dogma lives loudly within you.
Right. That was truly an unfortunate thing to say. Those questions are inappropriate. The questions that should be asked are ones about judicial philosophy. How do you apply law? How do you think about the Constitution?
We know from his financial disclosures that he racked up a pretty good amount of debt on 3 credit cards and a personal loan, anywhere between $60,000 to $200,000. Was that reckless behavior?
No, of course not. And I think the disclosures also showed that he paid it off, and I think it had something to do with some Nats tickets and things like that. But again, if this is the best that they can find on Judge Kavanaugh, we're doing pretty well, and rightfully so.
Another topic receiving a lot of scrutiny is Judge Kavanaugh's earlier writings, where he says that investigations into sitting presidents, can be distracting. And he also says that it can hurt their ability to govern. So what does Judge Kavanaugh need to do to convince critics who say that his confirmation could protect presidents from prosecution?
Well, first of all, the president certainly didn't ask him for his position on that. What's very important for your viewers to understand is that in those writings, he proposed a legislative fix to the independent counsel statute. He was not taking a position at all on the constitutionality of investigating a sitting president. And that's an open-ended question that is widely debated among constitutional legal scholars.
Kerry Peck, spokesperson for the White House, on the team working on the confirmation of Judge Brett Kavanaugh. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me on.
Pope Francis makes an appeal to all baptized Christians to spread the faith.
Un battezzato che non sente il bisogno di annunciare il Vangelo.
At his weekly Angelus address yesterday, the Holy Father said a baptized person who doesn't feel the need to announce the gospel isn't a good Christian. The Holy Father says anyone can be a missionary. All we need are a walking stick and shoes, and putting Christ at the center of our journey. Up next, France makes some noise after its World Cup win. Conservative black leaders are calling for an end to incivility in the attacks on supporters of President Trump and his policies. Joining me now is Star Parker. She is president of the Center for Urban Renewal and Education. Star, welcome back to the program.
Well, thank you. Good to be with you.
Last week, you joined with other African-American leaders calling for the censure of Representative Maxine Waters. She had said that she wanted people to publicly confront members of President Trump's administration. Why did you do that?
Well, because we were called upon by a young man who runs a new group here in town, and as a result of Maxine Waters not being censored when she made those comments a couple of weeks ago, after we'd seen a variety of incidents from Press Secretary Sarah Sanders in the restaurant, from protests inside of other restaurants, and others being followed.
Mitch McConnell,
the list was getting very, very long, and so some of Speaker Paul Ryan's colleagues asked him to censor her, and rather than that, he asked her to apologize. She did not do it. She became much more vocal, and then they went on break for the holiday. Well, during the holiday for the 4th of July, it escalated beyond the cabinet. Now, this Antifa group thinks that they can just pull over anyone, whether if you are a public figure, whether you're wearing a MAGA hat.
And what group?
It's called Antifa. People don't understand the war we're in. There's a group called Antifa, and then there's another group called Indivisible. What the left has done, this is the hard alt-left. They have organized themselves into these units. Some are familiar with Black Lives Matter. They're a member, but the Indivisible has like 89 different groups. So you're called any and every kind of left-wing group have now organized into umbrella groups. That's why they can show up in mass numbers.
Once that group took it on, then you felt the need to come out.
Well, she gave them reason to take it on, and now they've expanded it beyond just cabinet members. So we're having guys that are in Ubers with MAGA hats. My personal space has been invaded as a public figure. I moved out of my house 8 months ago because the LGBTQ community came after me because of I made a slight against their rainbow flag. So these are instances that are becoming very volatile in the grassroots. And so as a result of that, when they came back to session, when we saw nothing still being said as if this was just a passing news story, then we start moving into the Supreme Court. No, we must speak out. So when this gentleman came to me, we energized our base at CURE. You know, we have a network of 800 clergy, and a few of them were available to come out.
What's going to happen?
Short of a civil war?
Okay, well, we're hoping there isn't a civil war.
Well, if they don't tone it down, there will be. Because what's happening is you saw the result of even the Red Hen. This is not the first time we saw it after
Red Hen was the restaurant in Virginia where Sarah Sanders and her family were asked to leave.
They were asked to leave, and then the owner followed them to the next restaurant, and the next thing you know, the alt-right shows up protesting the restaurant. Yes, this is going to end up the same thing we saw in Charlottesville, which ended up with the death of a young woman. It could happen all across this country.
Which was a racism
It was the alt-left and the alt-right. And but what Maxine Waters did was energize the alt-left to say, go get them everywhere.
Will she be censured?
I doubt it, and that's the problem. You'd have to have a whole lot of backbone to censure, and you'd have to have the votes. It's going to take about 2/3 of the Congress. But it's really important, and people don't understand censure and what it really means when you get that kind of black mark. So if I can just say in a nutshell things that most people do understand is if you're in a court of law and the judge says to the prosecutor and or the defense attorney, I am going to, you better be quiet now before I hold you in contempt of court. It's very meaningful to them, and that's what we're talking about when it comes to censure. The Congress has the ability to check itself.
Thank you so much, Star Parker, President for the Center of Urban Renewal and Education. And finally tonight, tens of thousands of soccer fans in Paris give a hero's welcome to France's World Cup winning team. France won its second World Cup title by beating Croatia 4-2 in the final yesterday in Moscow. But there was a parade for the losing team. Around 250,000 people greeted Croatia's players in Zagreb. They reached the final for the first time ever. Both countries have deep Catholic roots. That does it for all of us here at EWTN News Nightly. To all of you around the world, thank you for watching. I'm Lauren Ashburn. Let's keep in touch online. Follow me at Lauren Ashburn on Twitter and Lauren Ashburn EWTN on Facebook. Good night and God bless you.